Just as our mysterious professor Schiller found the perfect trans-dimensional loophole, the Marvel Universe came knocking. Psychield, led by a perplexed Agent Coulson, discovered this is no ordinary psychiatrist. Schiller met their covert intrusion with outright hostility, weaponizing his fabricated desperation to protect a hospital job he secretly uses as a front for his terrifying telepathic research. Even Nick Fury was left chasing shadows, recognizing Schiller as the mastermind who could shatter Tony Stark's psyche. And shatter it he did. After being fired, Schiller didn't panic, he pivoted. He cornered a volatile Stark, not with threats, but with a single, perfectly aimed psychological barb, the truth about pepper pots. With the billionaire genius emotionally dismantled, Schiller secured his prize, a clinic in Hell's Kitchen. His philosophy, confessed to a wary Charles Xavier, is chillingly simple. To fight the devils lurking in the shadows, one cannot be a hero. One must become a more calculating monster. On the way back to his apartment, a prickling sense of being watched raised the hairs on his neck. Schiller didn't look up. The enhanced vision granted by his spider sense had already captured the single, anomalous reflection on the glass curtain wall of the building across the street. A lens pointed coldly at him. His choice of Hell's Kitchen had been anything but impulsive. The luxury apartment building he had left was an exquisite glass cage, its residents mostly elite white, collar workers with predictable routines and tightly knit social circles. In such a place, any unfamiliar face was like a drop of ink in clear water, stark, incongruous, and the perfect incubator for Psychield agents. Schiller predicted that within 3 days, at least 4 of his neighbors would become Psychield informants. They would assume various guises and use every means to get close to him, circling like vultures to peck away at any shred of intelligence on him or Stark. To people like that, privacy was a quaint absurdity. Hell's Kitchen was a completely different ecosystem. That god-forsaken corner of the world was Manhattan's festering sore, a nest for criminals from across the country. But its very chaos provided the perfect camouflage. The immense transient population, combined with the labyrinthine gang territories, formed a murky, bottomless swamp, the ideal hiding place for a predator like Schiller, a powerful entity in unfamiliar waters. It lacked Gotham's theatrical madness. There was no Scarecrow, no Joker, no Arch, villains who treated destruction as an art form. The danger here was more primal, more visceral, a volatile mix of guns, drugs, and desperation, with the poor, the gamblers, and the addicts caught in the crossfire. They were ordinary people, and they were both the most common prey and the most numerous hunters in this concrete jungle. Schiller decided this would be his first foothold in the Marvel Universe. Stark's efficiency was staggering. He effortlessly swayed a few councilmen, and a charter for a hospital materialized in Hell's Kitchen. The politicians used it for a grandstanding media spectacle, spouting platitudes about New York, never abandoning any corner of its city, but no one believed the hospital would last a week. A hospital in Hell's Kitchen, not unless its walls were lined with razor wire, with a tank parked at the entrance, and every doctor and nurse armed with a machine gun. Otherwise, every last vial of medicine would vanish on the first night. But regardless of public opinion, a small psychiatric clinic hung its shingle in Ninth Tail Alley at the far end of Mary Street. Hell's Kitchen was a vast, rotting spiderweb where hundreds of gangs tore at each other. The notion that Kingpin was its emperor was a misconception. Wilson Fisk's business empire had long since outgrown this slum. His criminal enterprises spanned the entire East Coast. This place was merely an insignificant node for his drug and smuggling operations. He didn't even live here. The devil of Hell's Kitchen, born in this very neighborhood, was his sworn enemy, but their battleground had long since escalated beyond the confines of this district. As for Kingpin's other nemesis, Spider-Man, he was currently just a high school student, oblivious to the future that awaited him. To a crime lord of Fisk's caliber, the daily firefights, robberies, and kidnappings of Hell's Kitchen were mere ripples in a pond unworthy of his attention. So when he heard that a few of his men had gone crazy on a bad trip in Ninth Tail Alley, he dismissed it with a contemptuous smirk. Within Hell's Kitchen itself, however, a new kind of fear was quietly taking root. A legend began to circulate on the streets. A strange doctor lived in the psychiatric clinic at the end of Ninth Tail Alley. Every thug who went to collect protection money fled the clinic moments after entering, scared out of their wits and driven completely insane. At first, a few mid-level gang leaders, refusing to believe the stories, led their men in personally. But they too emerged as if they had seen a ghost, fighting wildly at the empty air, struggling, screaming, and weeping as if their souls had been seized by an invisible demon. The rumor spread like a virus, and soon all of Mary Street regarded Ninth Tail Alley as forbidden ground. People whispered of a malevolent curse that forced you to confront your deepest fears until your sanity was burned to ash. It was only later, when Schiller began to venture out of his clinic, that people connected him with the curse. They finally understood. It wasn't a ghost, it was a peculiar psychiatrist. Faced with their terror, Schiller offered a simple explanation. Those gang leaders had too many sins on their conscience, and he had merely provided some friendly psychological counseling. As for why they went mad, one can only assume. He would say with a clinical detachment that their psyches were not robust enough to withstand a moment of genuine introspection. In Hell's Kitchen, this explanation was more laughable than a joke. The only truth the people here believed in was that the wicked prosper. To make a criminal who had been dealing drugs, extorting, and gambling since his teens feel guilty, so guilty that he lost his mind, it was preposterous. Thus, a new consensus formed that Doctor was no psychiatrist. He was a sorcerer who dealt in black magic. Schiller never bothered to explain. The fear toxin he'd brought from the DC universe, though only a prototype, was devastatingly effective against ordinary humans without superpowers. The moment he'd realized he could carry objects between the two worlds, a bold idea had taken shape. He would become an interdimensional trafficker. DC and Marvel, two entirely different power systems, possessed countless products that could be exchanged. Take the fear gas, for instance. If used in Gotham, Jonathan Crane would recognize his proprietary formula at a glance. But here, Schiller could use it freely, without even paying royalties. The terrifying rumors became the clinic's best talisman. Soon, no gang was foolish enough to bother him again. Of course, the consequence of clearing out the trash was attracting the attention of the city's self-appointed guardian. Night fell on Manhattan, and the air grew colder. Schiller had just brewed a hot cup of coffee, locked the clinic's front door, and was preparing to end another idyll. Day before resuming his harassment of Stark tomorrow. He had just set the mug on his desk when a soft click came from the door. Schiller turned. The dim light outlined a tall figure clad in blood, red spandex, like a drop of congealed blood in the dead of night. Schiller faced him, calmly picking up his coffee mug. His tone was as placid as if he were greeting a patient for a scheduled appointment. "You seem to be a little late, Mr. Daredevil." "You know who I am, Doctor." Daredevil's voice was low and wary. Schiller took a sip of coffee, of course, the famous guardian of Hell's Kitchen. "But you've only just arrived here." "I'm more familiar with your other identity, Counselor Murdoch." As the words fell, Daredevil's frame went rigid. He couldn't comprehend how this doctor of unknown origin had so easily pierced his anonymity. Schiller gave him no time to ask, pressing his advantage like a hunter closing in. An honor student from Columbia University, a successful career right after graduation, even starting your own law firm, Tell me, Matt, what was it that made you feel the sense of justice afforded by the law was insufficient? A lawyer, upholding justice. Daredevil let out a cold snort, his voice laced with mockery. You might think so, most people would, but the reality is. Schiller cut him off, his voice as precise as a scalpel. The reality is, you decided a lawyer's work wasn't enough, so you found another way, but I am curious. What is it that you think you can accomplish by putting on this ridiculous suit and a mask that you couldn't as an attorney? My decisions are none of your concern. A note of irritation entered Daredevil's voice. You know, your tone right now is remarkably similar to that of a rebellious teenager, Schiller said with a faint smile. Daredevil was jolted into awareness. From the moment he had stepped through the door, he had fallen into the other man's verbal trap. Schiller had seized the rhythm of the conversation, exposed his identity, and ruthlessly prodded the most sensitive wounds of his psyche. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. I'll admit you're a skilled psychiatrist, adept at playing word games, but my questions remain. Who are you? What is your purpose in Hell's Kitchen, and why did those men go insane? Too many questions. I will only answer one tonight, Schiller said, setting his mug down with a leisurely air. Besides, I've had a long day. I'm tired. You have no right to disturb my rest. After all, I'm neither a gangster nor a criminal. You drove those men insane. You have no proof. The police need proof. Oh, so you consider yourself superior to the police. Stop twisting my words. Daredevil's voice was raw with impatience. Schiller leaned back in his chair, watching him with amusement. If you had been listening carefully to what I said earlier, you would already know how I discovered your identity. A headache began to throb in Daredevil's temples. He was at his worst against this kind of cunning opponent, one who demanded absolute mental focus. But his composure had been shattered moments ago, and he couldn't recall the details of their initial exchange. His mind was a blank. Silence would make him look foolish, so he remained silent. It seems you've forgotten. Schiller's tone was laced with playful mockery. I find it truly incomprehensible that a good memory isn't a prerequisite for becoming a superhero. Daredevil clenched his fists, vowing to commit every word this man said from now on to memory. 2 years ago, I was a professor at Columbia University. I saw your name on the list of distinguished graduates, Matt. On your post-graduation plans form, you wrote that you intended to open a law firm. Although I taught psychology, I knew one of your law professors. He once praised your talent to me at length. Answer my question. Matt forced the conversation back on track. How did you know Daredevil was me? You may have forgotten, but when you first debuted, you wore your father's old black and yellow boxing trunks. After I arrived, I attended a few underground fights, coincidentally to save on costs. The owner there has never changed the style of the fighter's gear. Schiller's gaze seemed to pierce through the mask. From this, I deduced that Daredevil was born here and must have a connection to underground boxing. A little more investigation revealed that the gang members you dealt with were all connected to your father's death. Once I had your father's identity, was it really so difficult to find out who his son was? Why investigate me, a guilty conscience? No, Schiller shook his head, offering an answer Matt never expected. It's like renting an apartment. One must know the other party. Understanding the landlord's background and preferences makes it easier to get along with him, wouldn't you agree? I'm not the landlord here, Daredevil replied coldly. Oh, is that so? Schiller feigned surprise. Then it seems I've approached the wrong person. Perhaps I should go have a talk with Kingpin. Then again, I believe I've already offended him. I vaguely recall one of my visitors that day mentioning his boss was Fisk. Kingpin, you have information on him. Daredevil's attention was instantly captured. A little, I suppose. Schiller stood and walked toward the door, issuing a clear dismissal. Consider it my first rent payment. I heard from one of his men that their boss is growing impatient with a fly named Daredevil and is preparing to bring someone in to eliminate you. So, be careful. Daredevil finally left, his departure hurried. It wasn't until the cold night wind fully sobered him that he realized he had failed to achieve a single one of his objectives. He didn't know who Schiller was, he hadn't warned him to stay in line, and he hadn't discovered the method used to drive those men mad. Matt slapped his own forehead in frustration. He suddenly felt that Schiller's metaphor had been frighteningly accurate. He, the guardian of Hell's Kitchen, was like a landlord who had rented a room to a dangerous, unknown tenant. And this tenant had not only paid the rent in advance, but had used that very payment to shut him up, leaving him with no justification to take any coercive action, at least for the time being. He could only watch as this man moved, with an arrogant swagger, through his house.